There we go. Just so y'all know. Cool. Yeah, you are totally welcome to play that.
Okay.
And then we're going to give about 10 minutes for folks to just kind of intro themselves and some of their y'all's experience with organizing, both with and in and outside of pipeline fights.
Could we diminish the size of the clock and increase the size of the people?
Yeah. I think that might be on your end. Like, I think you can drag and pull. Maybe I can also just show the clock for us. I just wanted y'all to be able to keep along.
I'm not able to drag anything bigger.
Okay. I'll just stop screen sharing. Yeah.
Oh, that's good. And the clock is still there at the top.
You just have to stop sharing at the very top after. Oh, I see. Thanks. There you go. I'll go. Cool. So yeah, Emma, do you want to start? I don't mind who starts. I was just trying to give some direction.
Sure, I'll start. My name is Emma, she, they. I am a long-term #1 fan of KSEC. KSEC is part of the reason I am who I am. And when my first organizing experience was through KSEC, and was involved with the Kindred Morgan pipeline fight in Danville about 6 years ago. So that's why I'm here. And I still organize. I organize with Kentucky tenants in Lexington. We're fighting for a tenants bill of rights right now to make renting in Lexington better for everyone. And I'm very happy to be here with you all.
We're so happy you're here with us.
Go ahead, Kimberly.
Okay, I am Kimberly Rummage. I am a lifelong Kentuckian, and I am a direct landowner that will be affected by this proposed pipeline route. I'm a student of learning everything that is involved in what's going on, and I'm continuing to learn about the aspects and educating myself to help educate other people what is truly going to happen to everyone along that's involved in this, not up into the ratepayers too as well. So I'm just a student and learning, and now an educator of pipelines.
And I'm Eleanor Craig. I'm a sister of Loretto. If you look really closely, you can see me in that movie singing Amazing Grace. That I am past the age of doing too terribly much marching, although I was in Washington last summer for the Poor People's March. The reason why I agreed to come on was just because I have such a long lifetime of participating in various kinds of movements to either protest or advocate or both. I sent a copy of my life resume as a protester so you all could be entertained. So I hope somebody prints that out for you and sends it to Emma and Kimberly too. I reread it this morning. I thought it was pretty funny. I grew up in St. Louis, and my first protesting was around the issues of civil rights in St. Louis in the 1960s. And my connections here in Kentucky really are because I am a sister of Loretto and our roots are here. In the 1980s, I helped us get the Community Farm Alliance started. I am proudest of having gotten them their 501c3 status. So I aspired to be an organizer, but I couldn't handle the anger. And so I've done everything under the sun except successful organizing. I even did my dissertation about organizing, but I couldn't do it successfully. So if you want to ask about that, I'm really open to what is it about anger that you have to be able to handle?
Yeah, and organizing looks like it takes so many forms. So I would say, like, to me, I would still call you an organizer. It just looks a little different. But I really love that we have like intergenerational knowledge right now. And I think that's so important in these movements to ensure that like we're building and not just trying to reinvent the wheel. Like that your experiences are so vital in this. So thank you all for being here.
Mhm.
I just wanted to get everybody on the same page of like our goals of this panel, especially our participants. So the goal of like bringing all of us together is to bridge these lessons between pipeline fights, to share strategy and show that they have been defeated and that we absolutely can do this together. It's not like a losing battle that we're against, and also that like we can create this sense of hope in ourselves. And usually that's like the most important thing in these fights, is that to feel ourselves in and not burn out. And also the second part is understanding why it's important to not keep and continue investing in fossil fuels in a dying industry, especially in Kentucky and in Louisville and the surrounding areas. That Kat has spoke a bit about it on Louisville being the top 3 areas for premature deaths due to the coal factory. And it's really interesting because they have invested in a lot of safety measures, but because it's so close to the community, it still ranks in the top 3. And I think that really speaks for how they view the disposability of these communities, especially with half of Kentucky's Black population living in Louisville and also being in the most closest to these factories. And also, like, we've seen climate disaster after climate disaster happen in Kentucky in the past few years. So it's like very clear that our overly exploited land and people is just compounding into crisis after crisis. Crises. So, yeah. So we have kind of 4 main like questions with different like prompts with them. So whoever kind of just feels inspired to speak to it first. The first one being, what was it like when you first got involved with fighting a pipeline? And how did it evolve? Like what got you all started into that fight?
And I go first because I'm gonna kind of like give me a slap on the wrist, because I feel like I'm so originally I was like so much of the population out there is what I feel like, especially in our area, is that they don't feel like they're directly affected. So they're not willing to kind of, they're almost turning a blind eye to things. And I wouldn't say that I did, but until this directly affected me, it opened up like a huge like span of like what is really going on. And I've been able to educate myself so much more and really understand, and trying to help those people understand, from the rates that, if you're struggling to pay your bills, from your water to, how this would affect your crops, what you eat, the farmers that are doing this. So that's kind of where, when I was directly affected, because our family is a 5th generational family farm. And that is how I've got started in this, because I was directly affected. And I hate to say that now, because I feel like I'm one of those people that I'm trying to like help pull into it. Like this is gonna like, it just pay attention to these causes. And then, when I sat down with LG+E and their 2 attorneys and the right-of-way landowner, they just sat there and blatantly lied to your face. And you sit there and talk about the injustice done to all of the people, that really the only time and the only place that you have to continue to fight for those who are not, because in our area, we have a lot of like generational family farm owners that are not, maybe have went to the 8th grade, that they got these people to sign off that may not didn't even understand what they were reading. And really what has been told, we were profiled that, you send this person out that will go out and shake their hand, have his drink set on their, just give them a little bit of attention. And they were essentially profiled for who they needed to send out. If they were college educated, you'll send this person out to negotiate with them. And and a lot of people in our area don't understand that they were kind of like, the wool was pulled over their eyes, and they don't realize how much is, out there and what is going to be affected. So that's where I feel like my voice to either stand up for them when they don't know what's happening to them, or stand up for myself and our community because they just don't know right now, and try to help educate them of what's going on. And that's why I'm still in this fight, because I've learned so much, and how many people will truly be affected across the Commonwealth.
So, so I got involved with the Kinder Morgan fight when I was a college student. I was going to school in Danville, and I got involved for two reasons. One, because I had been really inspired by the Bluegrass Pipeline fight and the work that I had seen there. I'd learned about it in class, and I was like very inspired. And then I was also working at a preschool in Danville. That was a really special place that made me feel really good. It was Wilderness Trace Learning Development Center, and it was a preschool designed to let neurodivergent kids and kids that weren't considered neurodivergent learn in the same classroom together. And that was really important for me as a very neurodivergent person. It felt like a beautiful thing to be a part of. And the pipeline actually was like 7 feet, the route was like 7 feet away from this school. So I took action because of that, knowing that these kids were at risk. And I went to my first community learning event because of that. And then actually, and I can talk about this more later, but one of the really great tactics that the Bluegrass Pipeline fight used, and that we took on in the Kinder Morgan Pipeline fight, was that they made the information really available to a lot of people, and encourage people to do their own community learning sessions. So I went to this session and then was encouraged to do one of my own. And so then took on some ownership of the fight immediately, because I felt like I had contributed right away. So like Lauren just did that for us, right? And so I then got more involved because of this encouragement to educate the people around me.
Right. I'm gonna speak a little bit more analytically. Mostly because I'm a teacher, and all of the Loretto sisters and co-members who participated in the fight against the pipeline were also teachers. And you would think, well, that'd really be a powerful tool, wouldn't it? No is the answer. No, teaching is not what helps people get involved. Teaching is a distancing relationship. It's a I know more than you do relationship. What helps people get involved is when a colleague, a person like them, a person who has a common interest with them, helps a person understand what's coming down that can be a problem. And I would say, Kimberly, I wouldn't fault the opposition for at what you called profiling. They did exactly what any good organizer does. Find out who can best speak to each person in the neighborhood in a way that will help them recognize their own self-interest. When I first learned about organizing, which was so long ago, you won't recognize the date, I was appalled that it was about self-interest. I just thought, hey, wait a minute, it's about justice and goodness and creating a more fair world for everybody. Well, that is the result, I hope. But what helps people find the energy to leave the safe haven of their home and reach out and act out in a public setting with strangers, what helps them do that is self-interest. And what helps them dare to be with strangers is by recognizing the strangers have the same self-interest. So if you watch that movie again, where we all start singing Amazing Grace, what had happened was that we went with a little plan, those of us from the sisters' mother house. Our plan was we all had questions. And we imagined that we were going to be in a big room with chairs facing in one direction, and one single representative of the company after another was going to stand up and talk. And we were going to call out our questions, trying to put them on the spot. Well, they were better organized than we were. And they had organized this big space into small information booths. So you could only go 1 or 2 people at a time to a particular information booth and be heard only one-on-one. And you couldn't even get the people who were hanging out to come and join you to hear the answer, because they had people roaming around, splitting us up. So that's why we all met in the middle of the room. We met in the middle of the room to say, what are we going to do about this? And one of our sisters, who's got a gorgeous voice, just started singing. It was not a plan, but it was self-interest. And it was not only spontaneous, but it was spontaneous right to the point. We got what we wanted, which was the attention of everybody in the room. And then we yelled out all our questions.
I think that's really interesting that you had said that, because I believe Kat told me, I sent her a couple of audios. The Rummage family had met with, LG+E attorneys, the right-of-way manager, and a third-party vendor that they had. And one of the things, we had asked very early on, before this had even been made public, is why did you all not let us know? Because they sent things out to wrong addresses, so we wasn't notified that they were even coming out to survey. And then why didn't they let the public know? Why didn't they have like a community meeting, let everybody ask their questions? And when we asked that, how they answered it, and it's recorded, and I can play it for you all later. I can send it out to you all. And what they said is that they had discussions internally. However, they know when they have these community meetings and you have a lot of outside interest groups that step in, that are, I guess, of knowledge, of power, of the right questions to ask that, not an everyday average individual would ask. They said that they tend to take over those meetings, and they were trying to avoid that. So.
Right. So they make 2 assumptions. One assumption is the landowners are not informed. And the other assumption is that anybody who is informed has come from a distance and has no personal self-interest at stake.
Yeah, I think you all really touched on some important parts of our opposition are organizing just as we are. And the goal of organizing is to be able to connect to people's self-interest and connect that to a community interest, and connect and kind of agitate, but in a positive direction on getting invested in things that do impact you, and being able to connect the dots to those things, because there's people trying to disrupt the dots being connected, and that's kind of our job, and we all have kind of a role that we can play in organizing at a big and small scale. Thank you all so much. Also, I would love to know what you have learned throughout these pipeline fights, and especially what was the most meaningful and important work to focus on. I think a lot of times we get really stressed out about the details and the weeds, that we forget to kind of center ourselves in what matters the most. So it would be great to learn from you all about what to ground ourselves in.
Well, the Sisters of Loretto are fortunate in having a goodly number of people who, among our members, who are really experienced professional organizers. And some of those people were available to help us understand the process that we were in. And then similarly, several of us went to Pennsylvania and protested with the sisters there who were opposing the transcontinental pipeline. And in both cases, the really important thing was that the organizers never showed their face. They did not act in public spaces. That you couldn't get them to give a quote for the newspapers if they just wouldn't do it. They didn't let themselves be photographed. It was important that in the process, the opponents not be given the opportunity to dismiss all the work as the work of outside agitators. And the invisibility of the organizers was an important part of that, even if they really were local people. But the only exception to that was the lawyers. And they were right up front, but they served a different role completely. And one of the most important things the Sisters of Loretto learned was that we had been doing so much education work around issues of peace and justice. And we did not realize how distancing it was from the people we were trying to influence until we experienced this work where our own self-interest really was at stake. We were involved because we cared about our own mother house land. And that made such a difference in how we related to all the other people. I can't stress enough what kind of difference that makes. I see people shaking their hands, and is that a timing thing? Is that telling me cut it short?
No, I thought about this a little too late, but we have nonverbal kind of communication. So if you see this, usually that means folks are like really feeling what you're saying. It's like our nonverbal affirmation. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah.
Yeah, what are also, in addition to like most meaningful and important work, I love that you touched on like struggles faced. So also that's like part of the question, is like some of the struggles and how you all adapted. So thank you for touching on that.
I will say for us, one of the most important things is as like a community, when we kind of came together early on, we had a petition, another individual who's an activist that has helped us that lives in the community, that she's like, 6 miles from this pipeline, that kind of gained her interest. And she kind of put together a petition and so had everybody sign a petition and, to start an EEC case. So that kind of started, but some of the adversities that kind of fell to a lot of people was time constraints with work and having to drive to these hearings in Frankfurt, that people just couldn't take that time out of their day or their week as much, that kind of, and it ended up only being about 5 of us at the end of the day. So some of those, while that was extremely important in coming together and seeing all of those people that would come together, but when it came down to it, the adversities that they faced to try to get there, to be a part and to have their voice heard, was kind of a hardship in the end. So it ended up only being about 5 of us. And then, when you have, and at the end of it, it only ended up being 3 of us, myself, another landowner, Kimberly Brown, and then the activist that lives, about 6 miles from it, Christy Collins. It was us 3 against, 10 different LG+E attorneys that were fighting us at the EEC. So it was, a huge adversity to face. So while it was a great thing and it was a huge learning experience, and we all kind of came together there to start, it was kind of an eye opener as to some of the adversities that people would have to face just to even have their voice heard and to be able to speak.
I can't help but echo some of what Eleanor was saying about self-interest, but like in tough moments, right? Like something that grounded me was like thinking about the faces of the kids that I worked with, right? That could get exploded if the pipeline exploded, right? Like connecting directly with that part of it was important, but and also like knowing how difficult it can be sometimes to take time, like what Kimberly's saying, right? Like to take time to like go to some of the things you have to go to, or like do some of the things you have to do, and like knowing how motivating it is for me to connect with self-interest. And so like I had mentioned, like one thing that the Bluegrass Pipeline did really well that we took into Kinder Morgan is that like in these like community education events that we did, it wasn't about this is what the pipeline is. It was about here are some of the consequences that can happen of a pipeline, and that is going to happen to you too, right? Like helping, exactly what Eleanor said, connecting to self-interest. And like, that's why the rooms were packed, right? Because it was a space not for like, kind of like what Lauren did, right? It was like in today, right? When Lauren gave the presentation about the pipeline, it was like, this is everything that's at stake. And this is like, there is space for you to connect that to your own life.
Right. I want to kind of build on what you two have said, and this would be that if we were writing a paper for college, we would call this tactics and strategy. A simpler way to say it is, how does this work anyway? But how it works is that, especially if it's successful, how it works is that a group of people who are being paid a very large amount of money to defend the indefensible in a public setting are faced with a very small group of people who don't know what they're talking about, but are struggling hard to at least get the essence, because they see that the essence is going to be tragedy in their personal lives. And Kimberly described it as only 3 of us could be there. But a part of the how it works is to turn that only into something that works for you. So, and to say out loud, there are just 3 of us facing all 10 of you high-powered, high-paid people. And why are there only 3? Because our livelihoods are at stake. And all the other people are at home working on their livelihoods.
Mhm.
And then to be able to go from that to talk with passion. Now, passion, and I told you I had trouble with anger. Passion is a tricky thing. You want to really keep your wits about you, but you want to release enough of the passion, or if you're helping other people get ready, help them get in touch with the passionate part of this for themselves, so that at the appropriate moment, they can be energized and speak with energy, instead of with that little small timid voice that says, I know I don't have a right to ask for anything, but we really need it, would you please? You know, that's not a really good presentation. But what powers the really powerful presentations is people's passionate sense of what's going on in their lives.
Thank you all so much. Absolutely. And that kind of leads us into the next section, is talking about like tactics and strategies that really felt powerful to you all, whether that was making like an impact and progress in the actual campaign, or even if it was just fueling people's spirit and getting people connected and involved.
I can say the first brief little piece is that we sent our oldest sisters out to knock on doors in our neighborhood. And when I said old, I'm talking about 85-year-olds, you know, so they totter up to the door and say, you know, I'm from Loretto Mother House, and this is what's happening on our property, and it's going to happen on yours too.
So I've been thinking about three main things that felt important with the Kinder Morgan. And 2 of them tactic wise. So 2 of them built a lot on the Bluegrass Pipeline fight again. So there was a group of people, there were lots of names and people that had been involved in the Bluegrass Pipeline. And okay, let me order my thoughts here. So my understanding is that when the Bluegrass Pipeline started, they started with a list of names that already existed from when there was a fight around a water pipeline going from Lexington to Frankfort. So there was sort of a baseline, there were some names, and they took those names and they contacted as many of those people, and then those people door knocked, right? The oldest sisters door knocked. They contacted a ton of people. They started their base building by just like talking to people. Kimberly's done this too, like knocking on doors, just getting people there, right? And then they mobilize these people too, right? And this is something great about pipeline fights. It is so easy to mobilize people because they are so bad, right? There's barely ever anything good that happens to the community because of a pipeline, and there's so many things that can go wrong. So the Bluegrass Pipeline fight did these great I brought them up already, but like these community education events, right? Where like they would lay all the information out. It was easy to digest because these are complicated, right? Like Lauren knows this from making their presentation today. Like these are complicated things that involve so many moving parts, and it's like so easy for the companies to confuse people, right? Kimberly said that, like the companies are trying to confuse us. They're trying to make it hard to understand what's going on. And these community education events made everything very clear, made the self-interest part very easy to connect with, and then also encourage people at those events to then go out and do more, right? So it was like exponentially increasing the number of people that knew what was happening. In a way that connected people to their self-interest. So if the first 10 people that sent emails had tried to like educate everybody about this, right, and do all, it would have burnt them out so quick, right? But because like first education, 10 people were there, 2 of those people go and do them in their families with the people that they care about in their communities. I did one with like people at my school, right? And then those 2 people go and do one, right? Like it just like exponentially multiplied the people that could use this language and like connect it to themselves. And then in Kinder Morgan specifically, I was really proud of some of the tactics we use, like the specific creative tactics tied to things that were unique about this fight. So like my favorite that we did, the Kinder Morgan pipeline was super old, 90 years old. Like it had been around forever, and they wanted to put it under more strain and to use it for something new. So we had a birthday party for the pipeline. Like one of our members, their mom made cake. She made us a big birthday cake. We had the media there. We had students there. We had KSEC members. We had people from the Bluegrass Pipeline came, community members. And not only was it like funny and like a great visual, it was like we were building community, man. Like I met my best friend there and we still organized together. The first time I ever met my best friend was at that thing, right? So like it was like a way to share knowledge between these 2 fights. And it was a way for us to have fun together and like celebrate. And so I'm really proud of like using things that are unique to this fight. And you all have started thinking about that, right? Like there's so much about this pipeline that is unique and that is like what Lauren said, it's a like ice, like these snails have been here from the ice age and they've survived and we're about to wipe them out with this pipeline, you know, like just that kind of thing was really fun. That was my favorite part of the whole thing, right? Figuring out how to do that.
I will say early on, there was a lot of propaganda that was spilled out by like some councilmen that had met with LG+E through the county, and they called us like the holdouts. The holdouts were going to cause you to freeze this winter. The holdouts were going to do this. And they put out a lot of propaganda at all of these council meetings or these physical court meetings and different things like that. So it really became important for us to show up and speak at those meetings if there was ever given a time. So we showed up at the Bullitt County, economic meetings that they have, because they're talking about expanding and growth. And they were the ones that essentially said, this is the route that you needed to take based on our future growth and development and where we see the industries coming. So it was really important for us to show up there, show up the city council meetings, show up the physical court meetings, and really kind of speak and get what we can into. And another meeting that we really kind of learned a lot at is the planning and zoning meetings that we've showed up at and where they're really trying to plan this stuff out at. So.
Yeah, I'd love to connect that to some like our principles that we have up on the wall, or the racial equity principles that we share out. And that's like working in your circle of change. And Emma, I think you touched on that of like connecting with people who you're already close to and connecting with people who you're more likely to like have a deeper, more personal conversation with, instead of getting burnt out and sending like a lot of info dump information where folks like see it and they're like, yeah, I would love to read that if I had time, or, among other things, and really working and spending your energy on stuff that's the most impactful and also like more fun and energizing, instead of like putting folks at risk with like risky actions and like knowing when to escalate. I really appreciate that information, that tidbit.
I will say one thing that I found that Emma, I think that we haven't reached out to is like a community education session that became really, really, I guess, positive and educational in her realm. Is that's not something that we've had. That's been able to, because a lot of the stuff that's come out about this pipeline, it's kind of outlandish, and it's kind of like, oh, they're just making this up. So the community really kind of doesn't believe that it's until they dive deep into it and they really read what happens or follow it on a regular basis. It's almost like so outlandish that they're not believing it. So I think that almost could be really helpful to kind of just give them, these are the facts, this is in it, them hear it from somebody else that's not directly affected, because that's where I think that some of the not understanding or not willingness to believe what is that, they're not willing to follow it on a day by day basis. And then when you go out and you say, this is really what's going to happen, it's almost like it's so outlandish that you're making it up.
Yeah, right. Or you're not an expert. How can you
Mhm.
know? Or we're
Yeah.
listening to the people who study this all day long. We don't want to listen to you. You're just,
Mhm.
it's hard to fight against that. And almost I'm inclined to say it's, instead of trying to fight against it by proving you know better, I think it works to simply come to people in a completely different way. Again, not as a teacher, but as a person who they can identify with one-on-one, as somebody that they like or admire or think is humorous. I was thinking about the word holdout, and imagining the little group of you taking cupcakes to the next big meeting, and labeling it as a holdout. I'm holding this out to you exercise.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Love that idea. We have a lot of like events being brainstormed, and I would love to just like build on that with you all, especially early. And like we're planning a benefit show with like music, and it would be great to like bring the community in on that, and also make that like a really fun kind of info session, and also cupcakes.
Yeah.
Great. Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to kind of riff on that a little bit. The opposition looks for all of our weaknesses and views us the way they think they can make our neighbors view us, and so we don't want to let them shove us into a corner with their depiction of us. And of course, they have far more control or contact with the media, and that's one place where they depict the holdouts. It doesn't, I don't think it ever pays to fight back directly. Because we have far less power of the kind that the opposition is using. I think it's better to find any other way of responding besides absolutely directly. And humor is often that's why, all those late night shows are on. Humor really pays. And it is a way to get people who originally think that you're kind of a problem to laugh, and then something in themselves physically shifts.
Yeah, I think that like ties in really well with like building relationships, and how, like making it a process that's centered on relationships, because they try to the opposition often, I feel like, tries to create like an us versus them, and like people who are opposed are like outsiders, or they're trying to tell you what's right, and we don't seem like we have the same kind of authority that they do, so we don't know what we're talking about. And so when we center it on what's at stake for them and what's at stake for the community, that really shifts the conversation, and like how we're viewed as with them, and not trying to like move them, if that makes sense.
Right. I think, Kimberly, you've got something really going for you in being a fifth generation member of the local community. And you know who the other people are. That's really different from a lot of organizing work. And I studied organizing for a while academically, and most of the people who were inclined to step out and off their front porch were people who were new to the neighborhood. So that you are a long-term resident is something I'd play up if I were you in every way you can think of.
I will say, I think that is a benefit. However, I think you kind of mentioned on like how they turn your neighbors against you, because that's kind of what has happened in our sense. Since that has found, obviously we don't have, access to city water. And one of the fire codes is that you, in order to have a high pressure commercial gas line come through, is that you have to have, so many fire hydrants, X amount of feet, along the path. And that's not something that we do have. However, they recently just found a lot of money to give our roads access to city water. And we know why, because I have a KIPTA meeting where our judge executive said that they needed to get water and they were going to fund this project for us to get water because of where the pipeline is and the possible accident someday that they would need that. So we know that, we understand that we're the only ones left in our that has not already, signed their agreements and kind of sold out to them, to LG+E. So when we try to tell them something, they believed it's almost kind of like, well, they told us this, maybe you're misinclined, but now they're really kind of angry because we're stopping their water because we're not giving them an easement across our land for their water. And the county doesn't own any easements on our roads. So they really have to have our approval to get that. So we're stopping that. And they're really not happy with us over that, because even though we're trying to protect them from this pipeline, they want the water, but I know what comes with the water, and it's the pipeline. And they're really not kind of happy with our family right now at the moment.
Does the agreement about the water require agreement about the pipeline?
In order for them to put the pipeline in the ground per like fire codes and fire regulations, they have to have fire hydrants. Yeah.
Yes, I understand that part. But in giving an easement for the water, do you have to sign something that gives permission for the pipeline?
No, not necessarily, but
I would say to them in the most public way, I'm taking your water and I'm not taking your pipeline.
Yeah. Well, we're kind of in the condemnation stages, so it's kind of like left out of our hands. It's in the appeals court, but this is like our one hang up. If we do not sign and give them, an easement agreement with the water, if the appeals court, rules against us, then this is their hang up. Like, you can't get your pipeline. So we're kind of like waiting until the appeals court makes their ruling.
Sure.
And kind of going from there.
Sure.
I have a question. I would just like to put this out for the group. How do you all feel about like actually making them into an enemy, right? Like Kimberly, I know you have a recording of them saying like some stuff to you that would just like, right? Like if I heard somebody saying that, like, do you think that is a useful thing that should be considered, right? Like, first of all, I think you should play it, but I think I would be interested in talking about that a little bit, like how I know that's been something that this pipeline fight maybe has shied away from a little bit, is like directly attacking Jim Beam or whatever. And I'm just interested in thinking about that some. Maybe.
We've kind of talked about that over some time, and really honestly, I think I know I have this audio that's just outlandish and but some of the stories that people have and like what they did to them to get them to sign their easement agreements, and how they lied to them, and the consequences that came immediately right after that. There's been people that have lost their lives almost immediately right after that. And I don't have the right to tell their stories, but they're pretty disheartening of what they threatened them with and what they would lose if they didn't sign. I don't have the right to tell their stories, but other people may. So that could be. And like I said, I have like 4 hours of audio that can just be, just downright just unimaginable of what LG+E just said. when they, and kind of how when I played this, because I did play the Run Like Hell tape to the Public Service Commission, and I kind of used it as, what they said when they thought no one important was listening, because they didn't know that they were being recorded. So they said all of this stuff when they thought no one important was listening. And this is really kind of what they were, who they truly are. They don't care about individual lives. They don't care about a lot of different things. And they tell you, well, if you can run like hell, we'll tell tell my husband's 85-year-old grandmother, can she run like hell? Tell my neighbors who don't have that capability, and do that. And then tell my neighbors who don't understand what's going on, that they just didn't want to give you the time or day to ask your questions or to listen to what could potentially be at risk, just because they didn't want an outside interest group taking over the meeting. So, I can play those for you all right now if you would like to hear them, or if you would like me to send them out. Okay, let me see.
Yeah,
Okay.
definitely.
Let me see if you can hear this.
It's not coming through.
Did you hear any of that?
Not much.
Okay.
What format is it, Kimberly? Is it like could you
It
email
is-
or text it? We could maybe.
I can email it or text it, either way. I've cropped it down in various different forms and saved it across. So I can definitely email it or text it to you all. Really what you kind of hear there is my father-in-law asking them, what in event of an explosion, what are, and due to our limited resources, and they just tell us basically to run like hell.
Yeah, Kat says that they have it too. So we can also play it on our end.
Yeah, let me see. I think I've sent it to Kat. I can re-forward it to her so she has it right. There you go.
Emma, I want to respond to what I think was your question about what is it like if we turn the opposition into the enemy? And that touches a lot on why I wasn't able to be an organizer. When I view people as having something that they won't get, that I need, and they won't give it to me, or when I view people as not listening to me, I feel a terrible anger that comes straight from bad things that happened in my childhood. And I don't have control of that enough to simultaneously practice good strategy and allow other people to participate and take over when I'm disabled by my anger. I lose the capacity to make choices. And I've seen that happen to other people in other circumstances when they are very, very personally engaged in angriness. When they view what's happening as being done to them and they're the victim, they lose the capacity to make choices that are in their own best interest. And I think that's the strongest reason for not making an enemy of the opposition. But you really just don't only have to think about Donald Trump and then the people breaking into the Capitol building. They had all lost the capacity to act in their own self-interest toward what they wanted. It didn't work for them, and it just has done terrible things to our society. And I don't want to be part of that.
I hear that so deeply, Eleanor. I have struggled with that too. And I know that that is a big, like in organizing, dealing with the things in my past that caused me to not act in my self-interest is a huge part of the whole thing, right? That's what I'm thinking about the most, really. But I will also say that I have been involved in organizing fights where it was really important that we constructed that narrative, right? Like, this company will never act in a way that is good for us. That just won't happen. They're not going to do it. They don't really care about us. And it's our job to protect ourselves. Like, that has been very, in the Kinder Morgan fight, we did that a little bit, and we didn't have to escalate super high because of the work of people before us. We won with, medium escalation, right? But like in Lexington, I was involved in getting the no-knock ban passed in Lexington during the Breonna Taylor uprising. And like that, we had to escalate the heck out of that, right? Like it wasn't going to happen because all of the city council member had personal relationships with the police department and the FOP. Like they weren't going to make that decision. They were going to do what the police chief said. And like that was where they were coming from. And the community felt differently, right? So we did have to escalate in a way that sometimes got really angry. And so I don't know. I don't know. That's just a thing.
Yeah, so we have about 8 minutes left. So I just wanted to kind of direct us to our last question, unless y'all have some other bits to say on that. I don't want to cut y'all off short. Because I think it's really important to explore like the idea of anger. Like it's okay to be angry. There's a lot of things to be angry, and it's about whether we let it control us or if we let it kind of fuel us in a way that's like a healthy direction, and be, like you said, being able to still make those rational and safe decisions for your community. So I definitely feel what y'all are saying. Oh, go ahead. Okay. But I would love to know like the bigger picture of like why you all think that it's critical to stop pipelines and new investments in fossil fuels, like what the connection that this has to our personal and into a bigger picture. Does that make sense?
For me personally, it's been, I can trace the change of mind that I've gone through in the last 20 years. It's pretty, 20 years ago, I wouldn't have said that that it was critical that we immediately stop development of fossil fuel transportation or bringing it up from the ground. I would have said something that was more really basically stalling, but I've come to different conclusions now. And I think the biggest change for me has been that watching around me, the decisions by other people and organizations and civic groups and countries, some people have gone ahead and stopped, and the world didn't come apart, and alternatives were found. And so I've been convinced really by seeing how it's turned out when people with more foresight than I've had have just gone ahead and acted. So my own community has completely disinvested from all fossil fuels. So of course, in the last year, our investments have lost a great deal more value than they would have if we'd held on to those fossil fuels, which our investment managers like to remind us over and over again. But that's what we decided to do, and that is what we did. We just got rid of all of them. But it's if the thing is we would have to get rid of all of our stock in electric companies too, because the electric companies are making electricity from gas. I sit here in the middle of Marion County and I'm warm today because our propane gas tanks are feeding our heater. And there isn't any other way to do it differently overnight. So that's a little bit of a problem. We have converted to just, gas, just to electric run heaters, but that electricity is made by burning gas in Louisville. So it's critical that we stop as quickly as we see a way to do it. And also it's critical that we continue to ask, well, what is the current state? And have we really finished what we started out to do? Or are we still looking for alternatives that are better?
Well, I think it's important on our end. You see everything, technology changes. If you look at we just have to be open to more and seeing where it's at. I think solar can be used a little bit more, but I think the cost of solar for each individual family. So I think it's really important of helping those renewables, energies and forces to be more affordable to the average individual, because I think that's where a lot of people are at with, fossil fuels, is that it's the cheaper route right now. However, rates keep increasing. So I really think that to really focus on making renewables such as solar, especially for our area, just more affordable to the average family or individual, so that they look in those directions of, yes, this is a way for me. This is something that I can obtain. And I think it's really important just because, things are always changing. And if you can be reliable, and I think that Tom Fitzgerald said it the best in one of the PSC, he said, and it was over a solar case. And he said they don't own, and he was speaking of LG+E, they don't own the sun. So if it's something that they can't regulate, hopefully they can't regulate the sun. I think that's in everyone's best interest for the long term.
It's not the sun, though, that's at stake. It'll be the panels themselves and the wire.
Yeah.
And the regulations about it all, and whether
Yeah.
the regulations are fair.
I just come back to the fact that, like, here we are with another pipeline fight, right? Like, there's such a history of them in Kentucky, and like Kentucky is seen as a place that like is hostile to pipelines because of all the work of all these people for so long. But like, here we are again, right? Like, they don't care about us, right? They're going to keep doing this stuff. I have my electric bill right here. It's like $118, and like it's going to go up because of this pipeline project. Like, we are the people that what am I saying? Like the side piece, right? Like, I am tired of living in a world where we have to keep fighting just to live our lives. Like, Kimberly has to fight like all the time with her neighbors. Like, she's put in this position like this because somebody is just trying to interfere with her. She's trying to live her life, right? Like, just trying to farm the land that they've been farming for 5 generations. Like that, they're just going to keep doing this stuff to us, right? And like, we've got to fight back, I guess, obviously, but like, we are not just sacrifices to be made. We are people trying to live our lives, and we're going to make them stop messing with us.
I do think that that's really important to hit on a little bit more, is the rates. If you're not directly affected by this, and this is what I've told my sister too, is the reason why because she started complaining about her electric bill, and she didn't realize that the rate increase, the multiple rate increase for this pipeline strictly alone, and I actually have audio again from that same meeting that says they put the pipeline in the ground, and then they bill the ratepayers. Utility builds the pipeline, and then they bill the ratepayers. So they're not out any single money. So it doesn't matter that this pipeline is climbing up to, I think, $84+ million at this point, because the ratepayers are going to pay for this. They are going to recoup their money. So essentially, their stockholders and their company is not going to be out any money. But the ratepayers across 100 counties that are supplied by KU and LG+E, they are the ones that are going to be made to pay for this pipeline. And those are the ones that are suffering already at like such a, social injustice. Like those individuals who are already down there at that level, or even just up to the middle class, or even anyone that are just struggling just to pay their bills, it's going to keep increasing. And as long as this fight goes on, and just perspective, I think the last count, LG+E was spending $8 million a year just on their attorneys for this pipeline. So that's $8 million a year for just their attorneys that the ratepayers are going to fund just for that alone. And that's every single year. I mean, we're going on year 7. So, and these rates are just going to be off put on the ratepayers, and LG&E doesn't care, PPL doesn't care, because they're going to recoup their funds, and it's going to be recouped by the Kentuckians that are still going to be at a disadvantage over this.
Yeah, absolutely. I think y'all really like are touching heavily on what we call like a just transition. Is we don't just need these alternatives. We need, like there's only so much an individual person can do to divest. And usually that comes with like the privilege of being able to in the first place. And we need the people in power to truly like serve the people and not serve other big companies, because there are options available, and these would be cheaper options, and these would be more accessible options to people. But until then, we have to spend way more money just to access a more sustainable life, when that doesn't have to be that doesn't have to work that way. And it doesn't have to be where we're paying for big companies to come and ruin our land and then pay them to ruin our land, So absolutely. We are making great time. Thanks, y'all. And I think we're going to open it now to open Q&A. And really quick, I realized that y'all kind of didn't get to meet folks. So I'd love to do a little popcorn around if folks want to like say their names, pronouns, and like where they're from, just so you can kind of know who's in the room with y'all. So try to speak with a good voice, or if you need a mic. Hi. You find a spot. Okay, cool.
So my name is Max. I'm from Lexington. Use any pronouns. And I'm very personally invested in this because I'm majoring in like natural resources and environmental sciences.
Yeah.
My name is Andrea. My pronouns are she, her. I live in Lexington. I don't want to pay more on my utilities. So yeah.
My name is Lauren. I use she, they pronouns. I grew up in Northern Kentucky, but I live in Lexington right now. And yeah, I guess I'm just supposed to, keep it in the ground kind of, I guess. So.
My name's Claude. I use he, they pronouns. I'm from Bowling Green, but I live in Lexington right now. It just really terrifies me to think, like if this were built, like what that opens up for, for them to continue to do to our communities and just the people around the pipeline. It just terrifies me to think of what could happen. It's just scary.
Currently I am in Moorhead, but I was born in Owensboro, and I have a lot of family in Louisville and also Louisville County. My pronouns are he, him, and mainly like what I really focused about on this pipeline is like pipelines in general is always like one pipeline at a time, and they're just going to be built one after the other. So we got to like really stop them, and like until legislation is passed and upheld to like prevent them all together, it's just going to be like one issue at a time. So this is what we got to focus on right now.
I'm Connor Hess, they, them pronouns, but not picky. I'm a student of ecology, and I really worry about our environment's degradation and continued ability to support a population of people at all, and the loss of biodiversity and species that could cause the total collapse of important ecological systems that support the rest of life on our continent and planet. And I go EKU.
Hey y'all, I'm Kat. I use they, them pronouns, and there's so many reasons that I care about this issue. But really the main thing is I'm really tired of companies thinking that they can stuff their pockets full of money while they literally are putting people's lives at risk. And I'm tired of money going above people's lives.
I'm Maddie. I use they, she, he pronouns. I'm from Louisville. I'm a senior in high school, and I guess I'm interested
just for the future of people on the planet, and especially interested in learning more of how to like organize as a community of youth in the community.
Promise, I use she, her pronouns. I go to WKU, and I guess I care about this for the same reasons as literally everyone else.
And I'm Jay, they, them also, originally from Bowling Green, and I live in Louisville now. So obviously like paying ridiculous amount of money in energy bills, so personally affected, but I love the land and I love Kentucky, and I feel like everywhere I go, I see the degradation and the exploitation of both people and land. And I'm just fucking tired of seeing it everywhere while the same thing happens over and over. But yeah, thanks for joining us. And I'll open it up to folks to ask questions with a little bit of time we have left.
So I also wanted to just start with the question to Kimberly, if there's any other like very specific things about this case, especially being a landowner, that you think people should know that like maybe we haven't talked about yet.
One thing I know, I think it was really helpful to see where everybody's interests are aligning and like what they're majoring in, or one thing, and I know you all hit a little bit about the Snells with Bernheim, you know, the glade cress. I don't know if you've talked about the glade cress, the population that's only found in, you know, in Bullitt County. And then also here recently, I think as a couple of days ago, the Center for Biological Diversity has recently put endangered species as freshwater mussels on there, which also resides on a lot of this land too as well. But one thing I think is really important too is that LG+E never did any of these surveys on these lands. And so, you know, they have rescinded, they don't have a single permit for this project. And so this is not a permittable project, but yet we find ourselves in the Court of Appeals still fighting for a project that is basically dead in the water because this is not a permittable project. So that's one thing that I think is really important to note, that they kind of bypassed a lot of surveys and didn't even survey the properties for what really should have been surveyed for. And our government agencies allowed it until you know, the Center for Biological and Diversity kind of stepped in. So it took that notoriety, because we were screaming it from the very beginning, but just us average individuals, you know, here, there, where if we would have had a collective whole and a group together, I think it maybe would have went over a little bit better, but it took the Center for Biological Diversity to come in and step in and write a you know, a letter stating what they did not actually do. So I think that that's really important, that they did not complete those surveys on our lands. I do think that what surveys were conducted on our land, we finally got LG+E to admit that they didn't have approval because they sent those those papers to survey to other addresses. And we finally got LG+E to admit on record that they did not have access to our land, and they essentially trespassed to obtain what they did receive surveys on. Or so we did finally get that established. But yet we still find ourselves in the Court of Appeals. Me personally, and I hate to take this on a personal note, because this is a whole lot of information, I find myself in the Court of Appeals right now without my day in court. So when you talk about a fair and just trial, I've never had that day in trial or in court at all, because I was not granted a condemnation hearing because my attorney blatantly told me that I had sold me out to a developer who purchased his building for $900,000. And they were promised that we would never show up to court. So yeah. So none of our discovery, none of our interrogatories were turned into the courts. And it was found out, you know, our attorney lied to us and said he was entering the depositions. He was there for us. You know, we answered our interrogatories. We submitted them on time. That never got submitted to the court because lo and behold, 3 months after our attorney, and this comes after the fact, after we've hired an investigator, that he did sell us out for $900,000 to a developer that would reap benefits from this project. And it was stated and told that we would not show up to court. And when we did show up to court, if you go back and listen to the condemnation trials, you would understand a lot of that, because I was not allowed to speak. And when the judge asked our attorney why none of our information was submitted, when I claimed that it was, he just simply said that he was delinquent. And not a single person stopped the case dead in its tracks to allow us to submit any of our information, to receive any of the information that had been discussed at the other meetings and other developments. So I think that that's really important, that we find ourselves, you know, at the Court of Appeals when I really haven't been able to have my day in court.
Yeah, absolutely make it personal. I mean, that's so
Yes.
important. You know, so many people don't understand that like every day people are getting bulldozed and spoken for, and it's so important to have your story heard and known so people understand the reality of
People
this.
can only
Yeah.
ignore corruption when they don't hear about it.
I think it
Yeah.
also it shows how it's like, you know, you're trying to do this the legitimate way, like the way that they tell you to. And then
Mhm.
even if it undermined and
Yeah.
like nothing you can do about it because like through a legitimate process, you know.
Yeah. And I think too, it's also like the really eye-opening experience to me is because I'm just an average person going through life, going to work every day, you know, with my family, and just kind of not looking to have to, you know, defend myself every time I, you know, or my land or anything that we turn around, that if it can happen to us, that it can definitely happen to every single person. And sometimes we forget that things that can really happen to us, just because it happened to somebody else doesn't mean it can't happen to us. So I think that that's really important with this whole project. I think it's also really important to know that you pay your property taxes, you pay this stuff, but yet a company can come in for corporate greed. Obviously, you know, for roads and different purposes, they have that, but this is for true corporate greed, that they condemn your land, can condemn your land, not for public need, but for private greed. And there's essentially, you know, you're at the mercies of the courts, and hopefully that they do right. But when you know that you didn't get your day in court for a fair and just trial, the right to due process, and nobody has said a word for you throughout the judicial system, it's really kind of stacked against you.
Yeah, absolutely. Are there any other questions folks have?
So I have a question. Kimberly, can you put into words what kind of personal resources do you use to keep your cool with all of this? I mean, what you've just told would have me almost unable to speak. I was so angry.
I have went through just about every single emotion. This has been a couple years that has, you know, we're on year 7, but me finding out my attorney, I really went through, you know, because you don't know what to do, because it took us, we went through about 4 or 5, you just felt dead, like, because you didn't know what to do, because it took us a while to find an attorney that would even represent us. And then to find out on the back end after we've hired somebody, and per the investigation, is that we were kind of funneled to that person, because really essentially our initial attorney was the one now representing Salt River Electric in this case. And he funneled us, he said he couldn't represent us, and he funneled us to this individual unknowingly after the fact. And then how that played out, I'm not really 100% sure of who negotiated the deal or why they negotiated the deal. But you go through all of these emotions and you don't know where to turn, and you can't find anybody that will help you, because LG+E has everybody locked up in, you know, the attorney realm. And then it's such a multi-layered case that in order to bring somebody up as quickly as speed to be able to, you know, represent you adequately, it's really hard to find. But I sat on, you know, I will say that someone somewhere was looking out for me. And I sat down on a PSC case, and there was an attorney representing 26 McDonald's against Louisville Gas and Electric, and for faulty equipment. And if their equipment was failing, and this is just for everybody, especially with, you know, with the demand charges so high. And I just happened to look her up, and I looked her up, and I called her just on a whim. I think I was just sitting in my bathtub drinking wine one day, didn't know what to do. And I was like, you know, on a whim, I just looked her up and I Google searched her, and she said, can you be at my office tomorrow? And we hired her and her partner immediately. And when they heard our story, and they had an investigator there that was heavily present in the area undercover for quite some time. And they stepped in, and they made sure that they had him present for everything I was saying. And he was actually privy to some of the backdoor meetings, and he could testify and attest to them that everything that I was saying was valid and true. And they kind of took took one on me, and we were able to hire them. Essentially, they kind of, I won't say that they took our case pro bono, but they kind of took our case pro bono just because of the information. You know, obviously if something was to come out, we did negotiate some things like that, but they felt so bad that what our attorney had did. And I actually had information when I went to pick up all of our stuff that never got submitted to court from our attorney. I took the whole entire box, and he actually had another client he was representing that didn't receive their day in court. He has no longer access to that file because it was thrown in our stuff. And I had a lot of like attorney, like confidential information from other clients of his, and they just couldn't believe it. And they were just like, this is absolutely insane. And they kind of took us on, but you know, it was kind of too late in the game. They were given 10 days to submit something to the court for us to go to the Court of Appeals. And that's where we find ourselves.
Wow.
So this is a question for everyone or anyone who wants to answer. So like, especially like with regards to this pipeline and base building, we're going to be dealing with like a lot of rural residents who, you know, like because of their presuppositions, maybe of their political beliefs, they might be like especially adamant about, you know, like not, like how you mentioned, rather than appealing to like virtues of justice, we should focus on points of mutual self-interest, especially. So have you found like any specific like points of self-interest that either worked really well or didn't work really well with those kinds of people who were very different from you?
I know in the pipeline that Loretta was involved with, one of the things that horrified a lot of our neighbors, and they really hadn't pictured it to themselves, was the wide swath of land which the pipeline company would then have full responsibility for or full access to, that nothing could be grown there, that there would be trees would all be cut down, that they would be able to come on the land and go back and forth at their discretion. That bothered a whole lot of people. That really touched their self-interest in lots of different ways. It would be an interruption to their farm operations or the other uses of their land. And the thought of having a company have access to their land pretty much at their own discretion just really drove them nuts.
I will add that to ours. I've tried to disclose to and try to, because like I said, some of our neighbors, they're, you know, they don't have the eligibility to read. They don't read, or they just simply took what LG+E said for their word when they asked them questions, and they just simply lied to them. So they're not, when I ask, again, I have them all recorded, they're not fully aware that they can't farm their land, as they just think, every single one of my neighbors think that they can farm their land and they can take any equipment over that pipeline without any, you know, if they lease their land at this point, that there's nothing that they need to disclose to the leaseor about it at all whatsoever. And they just simply have taken LG+E for the word, and just trying to educate them on their lease agreement has been a struggle. So I think that if somebody could just educate people of like, and I have a copy of what some of their lease agreements, just because it was filed, that you can't even take a four-wheeler over it. So I'm not for sure how they're even supposed to take a tractor. So farming their land and what they've used their land for all of this amount of time, essentially, even just, I mean, really what we've been told is all we could use it for is cattle grazing.
Right.
And that's pretty much it. They don't get that. And I think that that's almost even scarier, because they're going to be taking this equipment over it, and LG+E's not out there 24/7, you know, monitoring this. And really, if they're taking combines and different things over top of it, that's over that weight limit that's in that lease agreement, that they think that they have rights to, and that's what they believe they have the rights to do, you know, what is really going to happen? And will that pipeline rupture even more quickly?
Right. For us, we really focus on the inevitability of an accident happening and what that would mean. And then also the impact on, even if you weren't directly in the explosion, but other resources. So it went over Harrington Lake, which is where most of the cities around, towns, I guess, around the pipeline get their water. So like we talked about water, like you could literally have your drinking water would be contaminated, you know? That was really some points we really focused on.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I think especially thinking about like how important land or like how hard it is to own your own land and to get to that point, just to have your land devalued and at risk and not being able to have true ownership of what you're able to do on it and what you've been doing on it and the risks that that poses to your family, like being able to really illustrate that for people who haven't wrapped their heads around it. Lauren, did you have a question?
Yeah, sort of a question that came up today. It's kind of more like technical in a sense, I guess. Is so right now the pipeline doesn't have the permits that they need. So hypothetically, if they never get those permits, would the landowners would they still have their land seized for eminent domain, and would it be like used for something else that's supposedly in the public interest? Like, how does that process work, I guess, is what we were wondering earlier.
I will say, can I, is it okay if I answer just from what I know, and if anybody else has any additional information? I will say that those individual landowners who have already signed lease agreements to LG+E, from what I was told, the ones that actually were able to afford attorneys had a disclosure put in there, or some of them had a disclosure put in there. If the pipeline wasn't built after a certain amount of time, that land would have revert back to them. However, some people did not have that put in there, so therefore LG+E will own that easement agreement, whether or not this pipeline's built on there or not. Even if it's 15 years down the road, they decide to do wind or something like that, they would have the ability to do that, or even resell it to, a cell phone company or something like that for that agreement. They would still own that agreement to sell. And a lot of times they do sell it off secondary to another market. So they're making money on their lease agreement that you're not even entitled to.
I have a follow-up question, Kimberly.
Uh-huh.
Do you know if anybody that has one of those worse lease agreements that doesn't have that clause? Do you think anyone would be interested in like appeal? Like, it seems unfair because they were misled and didn't have access to an attorney, like that seems somehow, I don't know. Is anyone talking about that? Like maybe appealing or trying to get out of it? No,
not yet. I haven't really, not yet. I mean, because here's the thing, some people are banking on us winning, and that it's not going to, it's not going to come to light or fruition. So I think that's what most of them are banking on, that have that knowledge. So I think that's what most of them are banking on, or they just don't they're either scared for a reason, whatever those reasons. I think a lot of them have reasons to be scared for what, the reasons why they did sign off, or they're simply afraid just financially that, yes, I'm going to have to hire an attorney, and I don't know how I'm going to have to, or how I would afford to hire this attorney to do so. So I think that while some of them may want to, there's obviously reasons why they're not, going that route.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you all. We have one more question. I know that I think we're a little past time. Are you all fine with taking one more question?
Yeah.
So one thing that worries me deeply about a lot of these problems, and it's something that you hear a lot, is that there isn't a real strong sense of community where I think that there should be. A lot of regions that used to thrive off of a really integrated city have been separated. Have you found any really successful strategies for bringing the community together, either preemptively or about the situation itself, but ways that really bring people together and keep them together to be able to work as a group of people against it within that sort of home area? I know, Kimberly, you've had a lot of trouble with that, yours for the specifics, because they have been turned against preemptively by that disinformation. And I was wondering if you can tackle that ahead of time. Has that been an effective strategy before?
Really, they kind of kept us isolated and secluded because they didn't reveal the route for quite some time. So you didn't know who was going to be affected. So you didn't know who to turn to. And like I said, we weren't even aware until they were knocking on our door saying, sign this agreement, because they kept the route. And what they said, they kept the route disclosed for in public service and court, and court documents. it said, due to a possible terroristic threat. And they said that after 9/11, they could use that terminology to not disclose pipeline routes. So you didn't really even know who was going to be affected until it was like the last hour, and they already had multiple people already signed off on. So a lot of people feel like that they're already defeated, and the neighbors are just, they feel like they don't have a right because they're not technically involved, and they don't have a say that this person signed off across the street from them. So it's been that's been a challenge, and we haven't really found the niche to really kind of pull people together because they feel so defeated. And who's at stake too? Obviously we've touched briefly about Jim Beam on this, but a lot of people may not even realize that our judge executive, who is heavily involved in this project, he is like the former, I think, COO of Jim Beam, and Jim Beam kind of placed him into this role, hoping to get certain things passed. And he kind of has a lot of things locked, so and still with city council members, with mayors, with magistrates, and where everybody kind of feels like you're up against a battle, and we don't really know. We haven't really found the right, I guess, sounding board to kind of go against them and combat Jim Beam in this whole aspect of it.
You had any better luck, Eleanor, or?
Well, I'm thinking about our end of Marion County, and what people really do rally around. And anybody who is ill, who has a terrible accident or a terrible disease, it's nothing to get all the neighbors to attend a fundraiser and contribute really sizable amounts of money. Similarly, if there's a terrible accident or weather event in the area, everybody pulls together. It doesn't matter who you are. Everybody's out there trying to help each other. And it'll be that way too if there's a pipeline accident. Everybody will pull together around the people who are injured or disadvantaged, or and all of the side effects of gas, spreading. If there were, I don't know a way, but you're clever people. If you can think of a way to simulate that accident ahead of time and involve people in saying, what would they do if there were a pipeline accident, and who would show up to help? You would virtually have the whole community. The one thing that comes to my mind is if there were a way to engineer a practice drill for a pipeline accident.
That's those are really good, thoughts, and hopefully maybe that is something that we could kind of set up. Another thing that we've talked about, just kind of like just between the few of us, is that the Lincoln County pipeline explosion just several years ago, it's kind of similar, and it kind of hits a little bit more home to me, where that was on a 1-lane road, limited access to, and it was it was just kind of hit home. And I think too, with the employee, one of the persons that is no longer with us, was actually an employee of Jim Beam, so that kind of hit in a little bit home. And I think one of us has some documents from Jim Beam that had internal discussions about this individual and her passing, and they just didn't seem to care. And it was actually revelation to our pipeline, and that was an employee of theirs that just perished because of a pipeline explosion, and they're just sitting here talking nonchalantly about the lives of other individuals because they need this pipeline. I think that, maybe the anniversary of the Lincoln County, just to kind of, and acknowledge that and kind of go from there, maybe would get people.
Well, and for sure, invite the Lincoln County people who were affected
Mm-hmm.
and their near neighbors to come into Bullitt County and talk about it in little community meetings or even little home group meetings.
Mm-hmm. That's a really good idea. I like that.
Thank you so much. Those are really great responses.
Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you all so much.
Well, thank you all.
we value your time so much, and this is really, I can't put words to how much this has been valuable to us and our fight together.
Good.
Thank you all.
Yeah, any last
you.
words before we close?
I'm glad to meet Kimberly and Emma.
No, yes, absolutely. I'm glad that you all took the time to sit here and listen to us and ask those questions, and any help is greatly appreciated.
Yeah, definitely. We hope to collaborate more as we build these events and stuff.
Yep. All right. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye.